Hello and welcome to this episode of English with Matthew, where today we're going to talk about Engfish. What is Engfish? Well, it's a particular kind of writing that Ken McCrory talked about in this book, Telling Writing. In it, there's a chapter called The Poisoned Fish, and he calls it a poisoned fish because he says it's a type of writing that we have learned in our schooling which has gone a bit stale, and it has a kind of stale, fishy smell, and we really need to get rid of it if at all possible. He says, students have really spent too many hours in school mastering Engfish. They've actually worked at it, reading cues from the teacher and even from their textbooks that suggest maybe it's the official language of school. This is how we're supposed to write. In it, the student cannot express truths that count for him. He uses the male pronoun. This essay was written a long time ago before people noticed how sexist that was. He says he learns a language that prevents him from working toward truths, and then he tells lies. And in this empty circle, teacher and student wander around boring each other. But there is a way out. So whether you're a student or a teacher, you've probably had this experience of thinking, I am so bored by what I'm writing, or I'm so bored by what I'm reading. And I think Ken McCrory has figured out at least part of what the problem is. And I put a little picture of a fish here, a blowfish, saying, what I really want to say is, but whatever that thing is that we really want to say somehow never makes it into the essay. At an academic level, at universities and amongst professors, they suffer from this as well. And quite a number of years ago, Dennis Dutton, a philosophy professor, started a contest called the Bad Writing Contest, where he singled out academics who wrote a kind of terrible, impenetrable prose, which is a very fancy form of Engfish. Here is one of the prize winners. It is the moment of non-construction, disclosing the absentation of actuality from the concept in part. I'm not going to keep reading this. One of the winners, Dennis Dutton, said he took the prize-winning sentence up and down his philosophy department and asked every professor in the hallway, what's this mean? And they all said, we have no idea. So it's writing that's definitely not working. Again, this academic is trying to say something. What I really want to say is, but they've got a wall between them and their reader. Now, a simpler form of Engfish, the type that maybe a high school student might write, McCrory gives us an example of that. And he says this comes from a student essay. I went downtown today for the first time. When I got there, I was completely astonished by the hustle and bustle that was going on. My first impression of the downtown area was quite impressive. You sort of think, well, what's wrong with that? That's certainly not like the academic, who we simply can't understand what he or she's trying to say. But in this case, the student is somehow keeping us at a distance from what they really want to talk about by just being so bland and so dull. And McCrory helps us to take sentences like this apart to say, where do they go wrong? The fish in this case is saying, you know what, having read all that, I kind of understood it, but I'm left saying, huh? What are they trying to communicate to us? It doesn't seem very meaningful. Well, let's look at it more closely. I went downtown today for the first time. When I got there, I was completely astonished by the hustle and bustle that was going on. My first impression of the downtown area was quite impressive. Now, you may have already spotted some things in these sentences that you wouldn't be happy with, but let's go through them quite closely, look at them through a microscope, and see where we can start to take them apart. Well, let's start with this phrase, I was completely astonished. And McCrory says, in Engfish, when you're writing this way, it's as if your words stop listening to each other. I mean, you lost the audience a long time ago, but the words themselves aren't listening to each other. The author used the word astonished, and as if they didn't even know what the word meant, they added the word completely in front of it. And McCrory makes the point, you can't be partially astonished. You can't be a little bit astonished. Astonished is the whole hog. So we don't say completely astonished. That's a waste of a word, so we can get rid of completely. The hustle and the bustle. Okay, first of all, McCrory says it's cliche. I mean, I don't think we really use the phrase hustle and bustle that much anymore. But he also says, was there both hustle and bustle going on? Or was there more hustle or less bustle? In other words, these are kind of empty words. This isn't an actual description. It's at about this point that I start to think, I'm not sure the student went into town. I don't think they've seen the downtown area because this is all they have to say, hustle and bustle. There's no vivid imagery there. Oh, and by the way, in case you didn't know it, the hustle and bustle, yeah, it was going on. You realize, oh, really, was it? You can get rid of that as well. I mean, either you see hustle and bustle or you don't, but you don't have to jump in and say it was going on. So this is what McCrory means when he says it's as if the words aren't listening to each other. Okay, we're just fulfilling a kind of formula here. Oh, and the student's first impression was impressive. Again, the two words not listening to each other. They sound almost identical. It sounds repetitious. It doesn't mean much to say that my impression was impressive. That sounds a bit amateurish in the writing. Oh yes, and also the downtown wasn't just the downtown or the city center, depending on which side of the ocean you're on, but it was the downtown area. Okay? Area sounds very kind of technical, almost scientific. I was in the downtown area. And it's this effort to inflate the diction to make it sound more important and more academic than it really is. We just went downtown. Just talk about it, okay? Oh, and by the way, I went downtown, and when I got there, well, you've already told us you went downtown, so I'm picturing you there. You didn't need to tell us when I got there. So much repetition. All these phrases can come out because they're kind of empty words. Let's see, what else? Oh yes, of the downtown area. We've been repeating downtown a couple of times. Oh, my first impression. Well, look back at the first sentence. We know you were there for the first time. So you could just say, my impression was. Okay, again, useless repetition. What else have we got? Oh yes, quite impressive. Quite is a classic Engfish word. We sound kind of distinguished when we say, it was quite impressive. Look, it was either impressive or it wasn't. We don't need the word quite. Look what happens when you get rid of all the Engfish. This is what you're left with. I went downtown today for the first time. I think we can let that sentence go by. It's straightforward enough. I was by the was. Those are about the only words left that aren't committing some kind of crime here. So you don't have to be verbose and super complicated the way the academic writing was. Even simple high school writing can keep the reader at a real distance. So what are the solutions? How can we go about fixing Engfish? Listen, we all do it. I do it. Everybody does it. We have to be on the lookout and try to fix this. One way, and I'm not saying any of these are surefire, they're just tests you can try, and sometimes they work for you, sometimes they won't, but see what you think. The first one I want to talk about is called the phone test. Then we're going to talk about looking at the main subject in a sentence, then we're going to talk about prepositional phrases. So what is the phone test? This is something I tell my students about often. They will be writing in this kind of surreal, distant, vague, foggy writing, and I would pick out a sentence and say to them, would you ever say that on the phone? Now they're under the impression that, well, you would never use your actual speaking voice in an academic essay. And I'm saying, well, maybe, maybe not, but the type of writing you're coming up with is so far removed from your speaking voice that it fails even to communicate. And I might pick out a particular word in the essay and say, have you ever said that word in your life? And they'll admit no. Sometimes they'll even admit, I don't even know what the word means. It just sounded good. I used the thesaurus function and stuck in a new word. It's like, no. We've got to at least make some kind of connection with our speaking voice. So take a sentence or two out of your essay and just pretend you're speaking to a friend in the class. Would you say it? Is that how you would say it? Or does it feel terribly stiff and awkward, right? Here he is saying, my first impression of the downtown area was quite impressive. What with all the hustle and bustle that was going on. Nobody speaks anything remotely like that. That would not have a great impact on whoever's at the other end of the phone. You'd end up going, hello, darling, hello, she doesn't want to hear this, okay? So the phone test, quick way to just run it past your ear and give it a listen, okay? That would have been a fail. Okay, second thing is take any particular sentence that looks a bit fishy to you, that you're a bit suspicious of, and check to see what is the main subject of the sentence. Now, that could mean two things. It could mean what's the grammatical subject, what is holding the subject position in the sentence, or it might mean what's the main topic, what's the main thing that sentence is supposed to be talking about. So I'll give you a real Engfishy sentence here. This is really over the top. There are many reasons why we can never be too sure who it was who so cruelly murdered the most recent inhabitant of 364 Elm Street, the chief teller in the local bank, Mrs. Windermere. Wow, well, I mean, it certainly succeeds in sounding kind of important and pompous, if that's your goal, but we lose track pretty quickly of what we're really talking about. So let's look at what's the grammatical subject, what's the main topic, what is it, is the grammar lining up with the meaning of the sentence? Really hard to tell what the main topic is here. What's it talking about? There are many reasons why we can't be too sure who it was who cruelly murdered Mrs. Windermere. There's a lot of extra stuff in there we don't need to know. Well, I think it's about certainty. I think whoever's speaking, maybe the detective, is saying, we can't be sure, and there was a murder, and it was Mrs. Windermere who was murdered, and we can't be sure who murdered her. That's really the crux of the matter. Okay. So what if we turn that around and say, Mrs. Windermere's murder is the main topic. So let's try putting that first in the sentence. Because if you notice, the beginning of the original sentence started with, there are many reasons that. Some people like to call that a dummy head. It's like it's like a mannequin's head. It's like the fake head to a sentence. It's not really the topic we're talking about. We want to get rid of the dummy head and put the real topic first. Mrs. Windermere's murder remains a mystery. Okay? And then I've changed it here. I said, for 4 reasons. The original sentence said, there are many reasons. We'll talk about words like many. Let's be specific. How many reasons are there? Let's say there are 4. So this cleans it up terribly. So it says, Mrs. Windermere's murder remains a mystery for 4 reasons. And now the reader is all set up to hear what the 4 reasons are. So some types of words that I think you want to be on the lookout for that give away bluffing and a kind of lack of redrafting. Does your introduction contain the words many, some, several, few, a lot, multiple, numerous, most, a majority of? Oh, those set off alarm bells in my head, because what they tell me is we haven't counted anything, we haven't done any research, and we're probably bluffing. That last one is a real doozy. A majority of people think, really? Based on what survey, which polling, how do you know, where are your facts? So those are kind of bluffing words that need to be extracted out of an Engfishy sentence. Okay, third thing you can look at is we sometimes use a lot of unnecessary prepositional phrases. Now I'll tell you a little bit about what prepositions are and what prepositional phrases are and how you can start to strip those out of an Engfishy sentence. Here's an Engfish sentence. The purpose of my announcement today, which is in response, now these are jokey, right? I'm going over the top with this, but we have all written something like it. The purpose of my announcement today, which is in response to the heightening of the temperature in the room and the area around the room, there's area again, is to bring to the attention of those here that fire is progressing through the building. Now, if you ask yourself, what's the main subject of this sentence? What's the thing we want to put up front? Not a problem. The first thing is fire. We just want to say, building's on fire, get out. Okay. And if that was the message you had to communicate, you wouldn't have any hesitancy in communicating it clearly and directly, and you wouldn't give in to the Engfish tendency. It's when we're not sure what we're trying to communicate that we start bluffing and the sentences become more involved and convoluted. Okay? Well, that sentence had a lot of prepositional phrases. What is a preposition? A preposition is one of those little tiny words in English that show a relationship between two other things. So if I were to say, the books are on the table, on is the preposition. There you can see, books on the table. There's a list of others: across, behind, without, throughout, past, beyond. You have to go beyond the fence. Okay, beyond is the prepositional phrase. Aboard, you have to go aboard the ship. Aboard is a prepositional phrase. Now, I'm not saying prepositions are bad. What I'm saying is we sometimes use them unnecessarily. So, for example, look at this. The purpose of is a preposition, of my announcement today. So look at that. The purpose of my announcement today. We've put purpose first and announcement second. Is that the way we want it? Or do we want to say announcement? Here comes the announcement, which is in response to, in and to both being prepositions, the heightening of the temperature. Which temperature? The temperature of the room. Okay, now if we were speaking in French, we would often have to use of the something. They will say it's the bicycle of Jean. But in English, we can shorten that and say it's John's bicycle. The room's temperature, not the temperature of the room. And the area around the room. There's another preposition. To bring to the attention. That's another prepositional phrase. Of those. Through the building. Okay, those are all prepositional phrases. Question them. Can you get rid of it? Can you shorten it? We could just say the building's on fire. Or fire. That's a case where not many of us would write in Engfish because we're so clear on the importance of what we're trying to communicate. Engfish creeps in when we lose track of that important message. So let's just check on the Engfish thing and ask ourselves, would you rather be the A person or the B person? And I don't mean in grades or marks, I just mean this is an A or B choice. Which would you rather be? A person who takes simple ideas and puts them into complex language, which a lot of my students do, unfortunately. Or would you rather be a person who takes complex ideas and captures them in simple language? And when I ask my students this, they say, well, I'd rather be B. I'd rather be able to explain things clearly. And I say, yeah, that's great, because that is something someone would pay you to do. No one would pay you to do the first thing. Okay? Mr. Engfish says, unfortunately, I choose A all the time. I'm constantly taking simple ideas and putting them into inflated language. And some moments in school encourage us to do this. And I actually had a student who said she was at a university and she handed in an essay, and the professor more or less wrote back and said, you really need to spruce up this language and make it more academic. I nearly cried when I heard that. B is where the money is. B is, if you can explain something clearly to people, they'll pay you for that, because that's a real skill. A is not a skill. A is a mistake. So, listen, that's today's episode of English with Matthew. Thank you for joining me in the fight against Engfish. I would strongly encourage you. You can go online and find that essay. Just type in The Poisoned Fish by Ken McCrory, or better, buy the book, and learn all about it. And listen, I hope to see you again real soon. Thanks much.